I've been looking at different research on the millennial generation in the workplace recently for a client of mine, thinking about how we handle different situations that come up with his team. How can he engage them more authentically, especially people where there's a difference in the generation gap. It was something that he identified as just something he was struggling with. So really interesting. I've been doing some research in various studies, but some fascinating statistics about millennials. But the millennial generation is now the largest generation in our workforce. There are more millennial workers now than any other generation. It's the first time that's happened. Next year, in 2020, it's estimated that millennials will represent up to 50% of the workforce. And by 2030, there'll be 75% of the workforce. 3/4 of the workforce will be millennials. Now, if you're not, I'm sure you're familiar with the term millennial. Do you know what, if you don't know the age bracket, so millennials are workers born between 1981 and 1996. Now, I have a daughter who was born in 1997, so she's just outside the millennial. She'll be a Gen Z. But when you think about, so my generation versus my daughter's generation, and as parents, perhaps we don't fully recognize what it means for us as we translate that into the workplace. The same way that our parents' expectations and the way that they worked and the way they wanted to be managed and manage is different from my generation's. And recognizing that there is that disconnect between what we want and what they want, and having to work alongside them to understand what is it you need and how can I help you to get that in the workplace. It's much more important nowadays, and there's a number of reasons for that. Not only because of the dominance millennials have in the workplace, but when you look at the research, it says 43% of millennials will leave their jobs within 2 years. Absolutely definite. I will not be here in 2 years. And only 28% plan to stay beyond 5. So for organizations trying to figure out how you engage your millennial workforce, how you help them to see there is a future beyond 2-3 years, that's going to be really important. Otherwise, workforce churn, your ability to maintain consistency in your organization, engage your teams so that you can continue to lift performance, it's really challenging if you're continually churning your staff. And if you look at the other information about millennials, this is fascinating. 71% claim they're not fully engaged in their work. And then you look at the impact the leader has on engagement, it's up to 70%. So 71% of millennials are not engaged, and for 70% of the reason for that is going to be the leader, because they're not fully engaging them in their work, whether that's through dialogue, discussion, helping them to see where they fit in the organization, being clear on the vision and the mission, being clear on values and standards, helping them understand why they do the work they do. And these are topics I work with leaders on a lot through programs, designing specific programs for organizations and leaders so they can better engage the workforce, all of the workforce, but in particular, the largest generation now by population, the millennial generation. And a couple of final things that were really interesting in the research. Only 21% of millennials say they meet with their boss weekly. And all of the evidence shows the importance of that weekly connection, praise, recognition, the positive feedback loop that you can generate as a leader has to be done at least weekly. If you're not doing that on a weekly basis and checking in a meeting with them, whether that's formal or informal, on a weekly basis, you're going to find that disconnect with them and their engagement in the organization. And then finally, only 17% of millennials said they receive any feedback that is meaningful within their organization from their leader. So there's a real opportunity here if you can get it right with millennials, because the gap is so wide. If you can start to engage, work with them on a regular basis, make sure you get that frequency of contact, give feedback that's meaningful. And on a previous video, I talked about how we create cultures of meaningful feedback. Really important, especially with the largest generation that are in the workforce now. So I hope that's useful insight for you. And if you'd like to have a discussion or want to link to any of the research, let me know. And I hope you have a fantastic week, and I'll see you on the next video from Focus of Growth. Thanks.